Delta. Okay, we're in. All right, so a couple of people come in during office hours, and I'm not going to necessarily give you the answers to the test, but are there any questions about the test? I might give you answers. There are prompts. It's designed for you to find stuff.
I was going to ask about the boredom.
Uh-huh. It's almost a trick question.
Yeah, there's sarcasm in them.
No, it is, yeah. Well, of course, I have an option. I have a poetic license from the country fair. I can use it. Okay. So here's the quick and easy answer, and there's a bunch of answers to that particular question. If you understand that from the brain's point of view, taking any drug is like dropping a safe on it. And that's literally not an exaggeration. That is actually the effect on the brain. So, great. Taking drugs doesn't essentially cause brain damage like having a safe dropped on it, but it's like that. And since the nervous system is designed to adapt, then it's just going to get used to having a safe dropped on it. So what happens when you stop and the brain starts healing? It's like waiting for something to happen. Nothing's happening except normal operations. If you've been assimilated into American culture, what does that mean?
I'm not sure what you're asking.
Okay, I just gave you a conversational example. Americans in conversation do not like silence for longer than 5 seconds. I mean, just look in conversation.
Right.
5 seconds.
We had to say something.
Right. I mean, and I'm comfortable with silence. I'm an American, but I'm not assimilated into mainstream culture. I can sit there for 30 seconds seems like a long time for most clients. Why are you staring at me? Okay, I'm just reading you. Well, what are you reading? Well, listen, I can tell you're on meth. Well, how can you tell? Well, you're paranoid for one, but 2, you can't sit still. All right? So, how do you treat boredom? You teach Americans how to sit and do nothing creatively. That might mean meditation. That might mean sitting in nature. Okay? But normal operations, after you've been drug addicted, you go through a period of boredom. So what it's about is teaching them how to deal with boredom. Because if you notice, when you're bored, after you're bored, something interesting happens. It's just a matter of waiting till the interesting thing happens, and then you realize, oh, well, there's always interesting things happening. Boredom is a choice to not pay deep attention. Okay, so the answer to that question is multifaceted. I mean, you could simply do meditation, sure. But
you could look for other brain rewards, right?
Yeah, you could look for brain reward,
Okay.
right? Because the goal when they were using was brain reward. There are other brain rewards like relax. Feels good. That's why it gets reinforced, right? All right, so I'm going to do a little bit of review just because I'm not certain that you actually read the slides if we don't cover them in class. Would that be a correct impression?
I read them.
That's an incorrect impression?
No.
You mean no, you don't read them, or?
I read them, but mine are so, when I print them out, they're so small that even with my glasses, I can't read them.
All right,
I read them just in the middle of the night while I'm working.
I'm going to skip this, all right? But you do have to resolve your issues with addictions. Okay? Not to be addicted to things that your clients are or addicted in the same ways. Okay? I'm a caffeine addict. And now that DSM talks about that, I have to have my maintenance dose. Now, there are days where, for example, where if I'm doing like an active yoga practice, I can detox myself from caffeine, go through the headaches, etc., and be chill for months on end. But I am addicted to the experience, and it has secondary health effects, like if I don't hydrate. So, but that's not the same as meth, and that's not the same as weed, and it's socially accepted. But if I'm honest, it's an addiction. All right? So, continually working to be free. So you have to be imaginative enough and knowledgeable enough to guide them through what they're going through, whether or not you've gone through it. You have to understand what they're going through, even if you haven't gone through it yourself. Right? So involved enough to be compassionate, but detached enough to be effective. You can't get caught in their stuff, especially when it's your stuff. Be able to tell the difference. All right? Courageous enough to go where they need to go. And that's usually a scary place. So you model courage by being courageous yourself. Go there. Talk about suicide or whatever it is. Okay? You can't teach what you don't know. You can't lead where you don't go. All right, so go there. So this partially answers some of the stuff in the midterm in case you didn't read ahead. But I'm taking that chance because I'm making a larger point. Right? There are social constructs of addiction. So bear in mind, the field of addiction is younger than I am in this culture. In other cultures, they build prevention, intervention, and treatment directly into the culture so you prevent problems, so they don't come up. Or if they do come up, the culture has a means of handling it automatically. But in order to do that, you have to be older than 1,000 years. I'm just making the observation of the cultures that have built in those kind of things. They're older than 1,000 years. And I'm being charitable by giving Western civilization, that is, the culture that forces us to speak English. I'm being charitable by giving them 1,000 years. Really, it's more like 800. So in my view, every 100 years of human culture is like a year of human life. The culture that America is a 2-year-old, Western civilization is 8. What do you ask how do you ask an 8-year-old to basically deal with life? If you're 30. Should you? No. Not that 8-year-olds aren't wise, they can be. Right? So America is a 2-year-old with nukes and cell phones in terms of addiction. We haven't really built in the things that we need to know. So, the social constructs of addiction. The reason I go there is because there are constructs or memes of addiction which then give rise to solutions and social policy. All right? How you see the problem gives rise to solutions. And if you aren't seeing the problem correctly, your solutions are going to be off. Right? So, unfortunately, you got me, and I'm a black Indian, and we look at the problem with history, economics, and politics. History, what happened before? Told by the people who were there. Politics, the science of power. Who's got it, who don't? Economics, who's making money off of this? That's going to keep it in place, right or wrong. I haven't done the slavery rap yet, have I? Okay, so understand this. Slavery. Capitalism, American capitalism is based off of slavery. Here's what's, then slavery had a moral dimension to it. That is, if I were a slave owner, I could buy a woman, rape her, get her pregnant, sell the kid, my kid, at a profit, and not feel anything about it. That's slavery. That's what built this country. Slaves built the White House, Congress. Okay, we had to go through a war to stop it. But that didn't mean that it didn't shift to other folks. The idea that I own you if you're my employee, and you will work for this wage. Better not unionize. Better not strike. Because there's always somebody to replace you. That is an economic decision. Okay, they came out of partially slavery. That was imported here. That's an economic, political, historical decision. All right? So there's social constructs of addiction that give rise to solutions and social policy. There's a word for this in English, enantiodromia. It literally means that which arises from its opposite. And this is my standard for if a dictionary is a good dictionary if it has this word in it. Okay, that which arises from its opposite. So, in street talk, problems create solutions. So this means three things. Enantiodroma means three things. Problems create solutions. The solution to the problem creates new problems. So for example, the cure to the disease is in the disease, which is actually not a bad way of looking at it. This is what homeopathy is based on. For the whole idea behind Botox, well, it's poison, but it's a little poison. So we'll use it for this purpose. You want to get a flu shot? We'll give you an attenuated, that is a weakened flu virus. Cure to the disease is in the disease. And then D, the way in which you see the problem is the problem. So this works on an individual level with your clients. Sometimes your clients can't see the problem because that's how they were raised, to see this problem as being permanent. They were raised within whatever culture they were in to see this particular set of solutions as the only set of solutions. And I can give examples, but yeah, I think I've said this before in other places, so I'll say it here. I was raised where going to college was not an option. I'm not saying that I was forced. Well, I kind of was, but it was a good force. That I had to read at least 3 grade levels above where I was. And that was reinforced at home. Parents made me look stuff up in the dictionary, and if it was a medical term, look that up in the medical dictionary. So that increases your vocabulary, particularly when you're doing that, starting reading at 4, and then you're reading medical text by 10. All right, so there's no question that I was going to college. It was just medical school, regular college. Any questions? End of discussion. Like that. When I first moved to Oregon, 3 generations of people who never graduated middle school. and thought it was normal behavior to do that because Weyerhaeuser is always going to have a job for us. Oh, really? Well, if you're black and from the South, you can't expect that Louisiana Pacific is going to keep your job. So you think that when LP moves out to Oregon and they're dealing with all white folks, that they're going to have the same attitude that you're going to have a job forever for multiple generations? You serious? You believe that? Well, if you have an 8th grade education, you believe that. You go past college, you understand about economics. Come on. They're going to send your job to Indonesia where they can get away with paying people $5 a day, $18 a week, rather than your $25 an hour. That's profit. Their allegiance is to profit, not you. But, I mean, when I encounter clients who have a 4th grade education and I'm part of the medical field in terms of dealing with their addiction, I have to explain it to them in language that a 6th grader can understand even though they're 40. So that's a cultural shift, right? We're delivering medical level technology to people that don't have that necessarily that awareness. So you have to like break it down to them, right? Problems create solutions. People understand that. The solution to the problem creates new problems. The cure to disease is in the disease. The way in which you see the problem is the problem. Let's apply that to drug technology. There is a drug coming from a naturally occurring plant that the sap from the poppy mimics the endorphin system in your body, and it psychologically changes how you feel about pain. Doesn't stop the pain, it just shifts the pain in your thinking. Okay, so that's opium. Well, we can't be slicing up opium poppies. We need something in the winter when the opium poppies ain't growing. So let's take that extract of opium and create morphine. Oh, now we're having the Civil War, and people are in pain, particularly our soldiers. So not that you would know this, I'm a folk musician, right? There's an old banjo tune called Soldier's Joy. Soldier's Joy is about morphine addiction. Bet you didn't know that. Soldier's Joy is about morphine addiction. Oh, anyway. So, how are we going to deal with that morphine addiction? Bayer Laboratories has the answer. The same Bayer people that Suboxone, let's see, there's a medical marijuana analog in Canada, Bayer Laboratories out of Germany, aspirin, over-the-counter heroin. Why do we call it heroin? Because of the war heroes that are addicted to morphine. Heroin becomes the cure to morphine. Morphine becomes the cure to opium. What happens in World War II when we have all the, when the Nazis can't get access to the turkey poppy fields? They create synthetic heroin, except they call it dolphine after Adolf. We call it here methadone. Methadone is the cure to heroin addiction, which was the cure to morphine addiction, which was the cure to opium. You see a pattern here. This is enantiodromia. Problems engender solutions. Solutions create new problems, etc., etc., etc. Who would think that PCP is a cure to pregnancy? Not cure to pregnancy, cure to pain in labor. Oh, sure, it cuts the pain, but mom can't remember being pregnant afterwards, and besides hallucinating monsters while labor. Who knows what's happening to the fetus? But, All right? So these social constructs. So That's why I came up with 5 cultural ways of seeing addictions. And they're cultural relative to the culture that generated them. So the first 3 are what we used to, we meaning people before me, so I teach them because they're still in operation and evidence, and then 2 others. The first is addiction is sin. Sin is a legal and religious concept. For example, within Judeo-Christian, it's willful misbehavior. The view is, you're a drug addict, you know better, you shouldn't be doing it, so we're gonna, but if you're doing it, then you must be willfully misbehaving. You know the right thing to do, but you ain't doing it, so, all right? Willful misbehavior. You just have low moral character. You just need willpower. Okay? So the solution is to punish the addict. Jail, death, incarceration, some kind of public shaming. This is where the stigma in our field comes from. Why people are not really willing to admit that they have a problem. Because this was social policy. And it was the social policy in this country up until 56. And not that it's gone away, if you notice. Okay? Addiction is disease. This started in 56 with the AMA deciding that alcoholism is a disease. Has a beginning, a middle, an end. Gets progressively worse without treatment. Has certain symptoms, etc., etc., etc. Okay, so if this is the view of addiction, then the solution is treat the addict with 12-step based treatment. So you can see this is a step up from simply punishing the addict. But there's a problem. And you could see the problem depending on from the point of view of who you're talking about. Right? So if you're the science crowd, how many doses of 12-step based treatment will we pay for?
8.
That's a real number. You just didn't pull that out of your hat. That's a real number. Used to be 3. Used to be, if you're a corrections client, this is your last chance, and it's one time. If you mess up, you're going back in. I mean, you still do that somewhat. Okay? So, we've shifted, and the view of addiction as a disease started out of the medical community, but the main treatment mode was 12-step. And 12-steppers weren't necessarily medically trained. It's more like a self-help group, or the way I like to think of it, it's people who were enslaved freeing themselves, getting out of slavery, and going back and getting other people out. Which might be, okay, 90 meetings in 90 days. Okay, so what happens on the 89th day and you have a relapse? Then what, you start over? Well, in the 12-step world, yes, you do. But the lab coat and test tube bottle crowd don't like that because of the reliance on the higher power, which sounds quasi-religious. And okay, how many cc's of higher power can you fit in this pill? They want measurable results. That's not reasonable. Like if somebody has cancer, you have a diagnosis, you have a progression, you know where it is, we do chemo, we do lifestyle stuff, we cut it out. If the person relapses, we don't blame them for having a bad lifestyle. Your cancer just came back. So if you have a relapse, because that's the language we use, medical language, if you have a relapse in your addiction, is it your fault? Well, because of the first, willful misbehavior, yes, you blew it. Okay, except from the medical point of view, which I'm going to show you that view, right? So there's a lot of blaming the medical patient for their problem here because of the willful misbehavior component. That view. Addiction is maladaptive behavior. So in this worldview, this is the worldview of the science crowd, the white coats and test tube and rat maze crowd. Okay? Mal means bad, a bad adaptive behavior. You are this is where we get the language self-medicating. It's out of Hippocrates. And basically Hippocrates says, a doctor that treats himself has a fool for a patient. If you are giving yourself addictive drugs, you're going to violate a certain protocol. That is, 1, you're prescribing to yourself, and 2, you'll probably tend to overprescribe and not follow the science. Right? That's why we have boundaries. All right? Addiction is maladaptive behavior. So, the solution is treat and teach the addict pro-social adaptive behaviors and skills. So, cognitive behavioral therapy, how your thoughts influence your behavior, that's CBT. MST is multi-systemic therapy, that is, how does your family system interact with larger society? How do you interact with school? Your work life, corrections culture, etc. There's others, right? But these came out of a lab, out of a psych lab, saying you're basically doing addictive behavior because you weren't taught non-addictive coping mechanisms. So after having a dose of my maintenance dose of coffee, I'm drinking yogi tea all day. Just herbs. Okay, so cognitive behavioral therapy, multi-systemic therapy, so, individual, family, society, how to negotiate those systems. Okay, so these three are what mainstream treatment was essentially about. Mainstream meaning Euro-American, ahistorical, acultural. That is, without history, without culture. And this was the medical standard that we were training people on. Till some of us started doing some different stuff. For really great reasons. As I told you before, when the Reagans were saying just say no, 80% of the illegal drug users were white men who made in excess of $50,000. Obviously, these rich white guys ain't saying no. And these are providing the context for the rest of us to use drugs. Because to supply them, there's a trickle-down effect. Socially. And these folks are allowed to use and destroy the society with no consequences. And I do mean that literally in terms of doing crazy stuff, causing banking collapses in the bubbles because they're on cocaine and think that they can do no wrong and that they won't be punished. And largely they're right. They won't be punished. But that's neither here nor there. So, willful misbehavior, punish the addict, and that was basic policy from colonial times till 1956 officially. Addiction is disease, AMA, alcohol is a disease, treat the addict with 12-step based treatment, higher power, sponsor, work the steps, and traditions, 90 meetings, 90 days, etc., etc. Maladaptive behavior. Science is the thing. What higher power? What's God got to do with it? That crowd ain't down with that, the higher power thing. So they want something we can measure in a laboratory. A certain skill set that works, that we know if we teach it to you and you use half the stuff, you'll succeed, or whatever the figure is. So, heaven help you, you got me. So I was trained in these three, or at least I was trained in at least the third one, because I'm a normie in 12-step terms, because they don't get where I'm coming from view number 5 and 4. So I'll show you those. Okay? So, but part of why we started training people in maladaptive behavior 20 or 30 years ago. So, starting with the disease model. Okay, there's a near total belief of treatment agencies in the disease model. The disease model is not well supported by empirical data, that is, the lab coat and test tube folks. Okay, some major hypotheses are disputed by research. So, hypotheses or beliefs, or as I like to say, memes within this view. For example, the whole THIQs thing, like there's an alcohol-related neurotransmitter. Well, no, there isn't. It's never been proven in a laboratory. So, you see it on a midterm, that is not a correct answer. Okay? It's not real. There are some treatment agencies that have been teaching it as if it is real. Not a valid construct. Okay, so a view. Once an alcoholic, always an alcoholic, or you were born an alcoholic, or an addict, etc., etc. That is scientifically imprecise. Here's how it's imprecise. You inherit a genetic tolerance, which we've proven only for alcohol. We have reason to believe that it would extend to other drugs of abuse as well, but we haven't proven it with the same gold standard that we've proven alcohol. That is, double-blind, twin studies, 20 years in length, and replicated again in another set of population. Once we get the same effect for double-blind, longitudinal, double-blind, nobody knows who's in the experimental condition, not even the experimenters, and the people who are subjects don't know either. Longitudinal, 20 years, replicated, do the whole thing over again, and reach the exact same conclusions. Only then can we say it's real. That's the standard, right? So yeah, we need to do the science on marijuana. You can't do research on an illegal drug. So it's imprecise to say once an alcoholic, always an alcoholic, or you're born an alcoholic. Yes, you have genetic tolerance. That doesn't mean that you will automatically become an addict or alcoholic. It just simply means if you do use, you experience less use-related negative consequences which could stop you from using, because you don't have negative consequences. Not absent, but remember the high school kids I was telling you about? Double-barreled COAs, both parents, both sets of grandparents, and they drank more than 20 doses, and were still awake, where I would be asleep after 4 beers, and they could drink 20 and still be awake. Okay? It isn't guaranteed they'll be alcoholics, but they had a great head start. Let's see, peel, maturing out concept. You grow out of it. Well, some people are like 40 and 50 and they ain't grown out of it yet. Spiritual disease, or disease as metaphor, that is, an object or an idea used to symbolize something else. Like an analogy. So, disease as metaphor. Primary disease, that it isn't caused by anything. Loss of control, powerlessness. A small amount produces uncontrolled drinking. Well, we do see that with some people, but not automatically with everybody. But enough times that we're not going to be surprised about it. So how do you prepare? Well, abstinence. Well, what if abstinence is impossible? The worldview that basically talks about harm reduction is medical, not within the 12-step concept.
So is there something missing in those people that lose control over just a small amount? I mean, because they're, I have an alcoholic in my family.
Right.
So, as long as he's abstaining, he's fine. But he's an addict of anything, like Dr. Pepper or cigarettes or
Right.
whatever he does, he's an addict in. So is there something missing or a chemical in his body that causes this? Or, I thought it was a genetic thing.
It's only partially genetic. And to the extent that we know, and it's not from this model that we know that, it's from the maladaptive behavior model. That would basically say his inability to stop is partly hardware, that is the actual brain cells and mechanism to put on the brakes, and partially software, putting on the brakes. And that's how we'd explain it. Okay, certain drugs erode or destroy the physical brain structure you need to put on the brakes. And other times, people just, they stomp on the accelerator and are unable to put on the brakes, but not because the hardware is missing. Because they're just not used to it. Yes?
And also, like someone who has depression is more likely to have an addictive personality or whatever because if they don't produce enough dopamine. So then you get that reward from doing the drug. You don't keep doing it because you don't have enough dopamine to begin with.
Yeah. So the new DSM-5 definitions basically take into account brain reward, and brain reward happens in a lot of different ways. So if you were, for example, hydrating properly, if you were exercising and eating properly, if you had a certain amount of quiet time, meditation, reflective, creative time, that goes a long way in terms of skill building towards applying the brakes. But what if you're not used to doing that? So if you're a typical American, sorry, I'm an American, but if you're a typical American, it's difficult for you to sit still and do nothing. And that's partially because of our experience of how we consume media. And also by that I mean now the internet or your phone, which, some of you did those personal addiction inventories, okay. Yeah, your friends thought you died because you didn't answer the text within a half hour or for days. Yeah, what happened before texting? Oh, you don't remember that? So, the strengths of the disease model is that it's simple. It proposes an alternative to the sin model and it gives patients a psychological out. It is simple, it is replicable. Oh, wow. Right? And it provides also a global non-using culture. You can go to AA in China, Russia, France. There's a global network of non-using folks. That's an advantage. All right, so more disease model, other weaknesses of the disease model. It doesn't examine the role of culture, learning, or environment, particularly where there is structural inequality. Structural or structured inequality. There was a great movie about Bill W. And I had to hand it to him because I came away, I'm not a 12-stepper, as I said before, but I came away with a lot more respect for him as a result of this movie. And so he moved from Ohio to New York City. And one of the things that happened there in New York City was in Midtown Manhattan, there were a group of alcoholics, and they were all white, all upper middle class like him. And there were two black guys that were attempting to have a meeting in Harlem. And these were black professionals. But they were meeting in Harlem. And they want to come down and learn how to run a group. So Bill invited them to this meeting in Manhattan. And the white guys didn't want the two black guys sitting in the meeting. And wait, I'm Bill W. I'm like the founder of Alcoholics Anonymous, and you're telling me the people that I invited who are fellow alcoholics can't come here because of their excellent suntans. He didn't phrase it, that's me phrasing it that way. And they go, yeah, we took a vote, we don't want them in here. So said, okay, wait outside. Okay, so you don't want to meet with them, have a meeting with them, but they're alcoholic. Should AA be available to them? Oh yeah, it should be. They're here to learn how to run a meeting. Do you mind if they sit in and take notes on how to run a meeting so that when they go back to Harlem, they can run a black meeting? Because apparently you've got issues with race, and Bill W. didn't have issues with race. And the reason I bring that up is because some 12-steppers have issues with race and will deny treatment to people of a different color if they're not that same color. Okay? Which, this is like a civil rights issue, like with why would you want women-only treatment? Some really excellent therapeutic reasons for having women-only treatment. All right, so the structured inequality. Race and gender is only one kind, and we'll get into intersectionality in the coming weeks, but there is structured inequality. So the 12-step model does not examine the role of culture, learning, or environment, particularly where there's structured inequality. The whole piece around race did not come from Bill W., as that vignette showed. So how it got replicated into the culture, and then, replicated without question. So the effectiveness in terms is generally poor, as judged by high relapse rates. And it does not adequately explain compulsive substance use either, because the construct was basically from 1930s, before we had any of the science. So, right. Okay? does not address current or historical trauma issues. All right, so maladaptive or evidence-based. Now here's the challenge with evidence. The word empirical data. It's from empire, i.e. the government or corporations or universities study stuff, scientific method. Okay, so the gold standard is longitudinal, double-blind, replicated studies. You replicate it, we can say that it's real. You can't replicate it, we can't say that it's real. This applies to long-term studies, this applies to p-testing. 2, same standard. Okay, you eat a brownie or a poppy seed bagel or a poppy seed muffin, you get metabolites for opiates in your p-test, right? Because one enzyme test is reacting to specific metabolites, gives you a yes answer. Then you send the same sample through gas chromatography, which means they burn the sample, analyze the light, they get a yes answer. 2 yes answers means a positive UA. No way, there is no UA for LSD because the first test basically destroys the sample. There is no second test against the first test, therefore no p-test for LSD. In case you were wondering.
Or mushrooms, right?
Or mushrooms. Right. All right, so empirical, evidence-based. That is, if it came out of a scientific experiment and that was replicated, we'll believe it. Which is fine if you study everything. But obviously everything can't be studied, and not only can everything not be studied, sometimes the researchers themselves have a bias. They're not always scientific. That is, they have a personal agenda, which we're human. Of course we would, right? So, maladaptive behavior. So, like literally, bad adaptation, sure it works if something else would be better, like in terms of your adaptation, like consciousness. So the idea is you didn't learn pro-social skills, so right, where do you learn pro-social skills? Not from Prozac. So for example, and there are various theories, and I've just given you some of the ones that are easy to adapt. So Wormser. 2 general conditions in developing compulsive substance use. So remember, from the disease model, where does compulsive, why can't people put on the brakes? Okay. Hardware or software. So Wormser is saying 2 general conditions. 1, the addictive search. Seeking external relief from overpowering internal drives. So you feel like something's empty, you feel an emptiness, you want to fill it. Mm-hmm. You don't know what you're looking for, but you just know that something's missing. So you try and fill it. If you're a garbage head, you fill it with anything and everything in whatever combination. You've met people like that. You've had clients like that. You've been in a relationship with people like that.
And that could come from a child.
Yeah.
When you're young.
Right. So the addictive search, seeking external relief from overpowering internal drives. And 2, the adventitious entrance of chemicals. This is where dictionary comes in really handy. adventitious simply means that all of a sudden the substances are there. Now, it's not all of a sudden. The substances are there because of other reasons. There's an infrastructure supporting them. Okay? We could not have an illegal drug problem in this country if 80% of the illegal drug users weren't rich people. Poor people don't have the money for an addictive problem unless they sell to rich people. Okay, so there's an infrastructure creating the drug problem that supports it. So adventitious, yeah, right. Unless you were born in a crack house, would you be on crack? Well, if your mom was a crack mom, sure. But how does your mom become a crack mom? There has to be crack around. How is there crack around? Somebody has to buy it. And if it isn't you, you're getting the, hate to use this analogy, but it just popped to mind, the sloppy seconds from the rich folks. Or the product that's been stepped on from their top of the cut. Okay, so there's an infrastructure. So the addictive search, seeking external relief from overpowering internal drives, and the adventitious entrance of chemicals to fill that void. So if we taught people not only not to be bored, but to be able to have that emptiness be empty and fill it in so that it isn't filled in with unhealthy stuff, we'd have a different culture. To borrow from Taoism, a cup is useful because it's empty. And then you can fill it. But if it's already full, you can't use it. Yeah.
Is Wormser an acronym or something?
No, he's a researcher.
Oh, okay.
Scientist, yeah. So adventitious, this is from basically a dictionary, added from an outside and often unexpected source rather than intrinsic. And developing in an unusual position as does, for example, a root growing downward from a branch. Well, that's unusual only if you've never seen a banyan tree, which actually that's roots develop from branches. But anyway. All right, so compulsive drug use is an attempt at self-treatment, i.e. self-medication. Narcotics and hypnotics counter rage, shame, jealousy, and anxiety. This is the idea out of this particular branch of science that drugs are feelings. And if you tell me what drugs you're using, I can tell you what feelings you are feeling or attempting to medicate. Okay, so this is also actually Wormser, among others, too. Okay, stimulants counter depression and feelings of weakness. Psychedelics, boredom and disillusionment. Alcohol, guilt, loneliness, and related anxiety. So there's actually newer studies in this, but I'm just giving you examples. I'm a black science nerd, so I actually like reading stuff in NIDA. So Kansian, Halliday, and McAuliffe from 90. So alcohol, opiates, or cocaine addicts are victim of traumatic abuse and violence. Okay, the resulting rage, anger, and aggression are treated with opiates and cocaine. That's self-medicated with opiates and cocaine. just talking with a person who's been clean 11 years from meth, but has basically been a continuous pot smoker. So for him, where doing runs on meth developed an anger problem and an impatience problem, smoking pot helps him study in school. I said, yeah, temporarily. Yeah, but for now, it works for now. Well, sure, because you're defocusing on all the rage stuff, and if you're actually interested in what you're learning in, you could sit down and focus, because otherwise he's got all this nervous energy, pot takes away, he can focus. Yeah, well, other people, I don't want to do schoolwork. It's boring. I'd rather play video games than smoke a bowl. Right? That's how that particular drug affects him based on his prior history, which also had some abuse in it. And so he's also dealing with the anger and rage. So the whole drugs are feeling piece, the enantiodromia of that is that people use drugs because they've had certain experiences. 2. So in the left column, so narcotics and hypnotics counter rage, shame, jealousy, and anxiety. Stimulants, depression, and weakness. So take, for example, people who are TBI, and for a while, well, before the wars, about 75% of the people with traumatic brain injuries did so under the influence. I mean, you get drunk and you leave your car through the windshield, spend 6 months learning how to walk and all that kind of stuff. You don't have the body that you once did. So you do meth because that gives you feelings of confidence. Doesn't do anything for your brain injury, but that's a pattern that we notice. Drugs are feelings. Drugs are used to compensate for other losses or feelings. Sedative hypnotics, including alcohol, are abused by those who are anxious and inhibited. These drugs are used to overcome defenses and fears around intimacy. Certainly we see that in terms of the reinforcement with basically using alcohol or other drug before having sex, or at bars, etc., etc. Courage. Drugs dissolve the defenses. Without them, people feel lonely or isolated with others. So part of the reframe that we do with clients is there are drug friends and there's real friends. And drug friends are your friends as long as there's drugs around. And as soon as they're not drugs, you don't know how to deal with them. Or they you. Right? So similar theories can be, of course, created for other drugs of abuse. So, for example, certain psychedelic drugs, LSD, ecstasy, mescaline, ketamine, yahe, Ibogaine, sometimes mushrooms, are often used to induce, simulate, or access certain spiritual states. And this can also be part of what Worms are referred to as the addictive search. Something's missing. What is it? Can I find it through these particular experiences? So also in maladaptive behavior, right? This concept of concretization. All right, take a look over here. See this? What is it? What material?
Cement. Concrete.
Concrete. So it comes out naturally gray, right? It's been painted white for this room, but you know, underneath the white paint, it's gray. So can you see into it? Okay. So even though it's made of quartz crystal, because that's most of the planet's crust, right? Or a lot of it. Anyway, concretization. What that means is that things are so mixed up that you can't tell them apart, and that's often how a client's emotional world is to them. How do you feel about that? I don't know. It's all mixed up. And they become familiar with the emotions that they're used to expressing, which stereotypically for men would be anger and rage, and for women could also be anger too, but expressed differently. Right? So clients do not articulate their feelings. This is considered normal in terms of psychological development for children and young adolescents. In chemically dependent adults, it's considered a developmental lag. That is, as long as you're using, you are not progressing emotionally. And as soon as you stop, wherever you stop chronologically, you might be at a developmentally delayed emotional age. That's why you can have 40-year-olds who act like 2. Not that bad. Let's be charitable. 11. All right? So when you start using the lag begins, stop using, you start developing emotionally from that point, but it's not necessarily a smooth, linear, temporal progression. And again, this isn't exact. It's largely a metaphor, but it's an observation based on where people are at. So for example, cocaine addicts thought to select cocaine for relief from depression or boredom or emptiness. Cocaine bolsters feelings of self-esteem and assertiveness. Same for meth. Okay, so while this worldview gives you great descriptions, it's not so great on how to implement personal, practical, or transformative solutions. Okay? What are the emotional skills I need to explore my pain? For example. Okay, if I'm self-medicating because of past trauma, okay, what do I need as a skill set to be able to explore that past trauma and heal it?
Just stop.
Well, you can't just stop using, because now all of a sudden, as soon as I stop using, I'm surrounded by all this awareness of pain. And it's overwhelming. So I'm going to answer that, right? Because pose a problem without a solution in my culture. Okay, how do I get relief from stress and trauma? How do you spell relief? Okay. As I talked about in the broadcast, earlier in the broadcast, some cultures developed these solutions a long time ago, way earlier in their evolution than we did. That is, as Americans, as part of Western culture, right? Addiction, in the fourth view. Addiction is life out of balance. Koyaanisqatsi, in case this shows up on a final near you. Right? Addiction is life out of balance. So Koyaanisqatsi is a Hopi word. It actually has 13 different translations. I'm giving you 5 here. You want to learn more, you go live in Hopi Lab. Crazy life, life in turmoil, life disintegrating, life out of balance, a state of life that calls for another way of living. Actually, the Hopi basically, it is actually what their view of Western civilization, particularly America, is. Oh, this is Koyaanisqatsi. Okay, so that's the problem. The solution in their worldview is emotional healing of multi-generational trauma. In fact, the word multi-generational trauma comes out of Native American practitioners, acknowledging that What happened to your ancestors is affecting you, and you remember it because they remember it. And they're part of you. And in Indian country, all healing begins with emotional healing. That's where we start. Okay? So then, part of the solution is cultural practices that restore spiritual balance and right relationship. So right relationship is like in the Buddhist sense, okay? Tobacco as sacrament versus tobacco as addiction. Okay? So within this framework, there's an addictive use of tobacco and there's a sacred use of tobacco, and they're not the same. In the original traditional use of tobacco, it was used only for prayer. You didn't inhale. And you only used it for prayer in ceremony, or to greet someone in council, or to start a council, or something like that.
Or drumming.
Or what?
Or drumming.
Or drumming. Sprinkling tobacco on the drum. Okay, so taken that way, without inhaling, it's not addictive. Also, you're only smoking as an adult, and you're not smoking every 5 minutes. So those who worship the tobacco god, you are getting closer to God with every puff. Little black humor there. All right? So, TP meetings, the medicine meetings, that is with peyote as a treatment for alcohol addiction, which basically is seen as losing your Indian way of life. That's why you got strung out. Right? The little smoke as an ally, that is the little smoke that you know by its Spanish name marijuana, as an ally versus the use as countercultural Prozac. So in this framework, basically, the use of it in a non-addictive use would be, for example, among, say, the Lakota medicine people only traditionally using the little smoke to seek vision for others, not for personal pleasure. Nobody else smoking it in the tribe except for the medicine person, and that being a held cultural value. Yeah?
Wait, what do you mean by countercultural Prozac?
Okay, so somewhere in, well, this has happened several times, and there have been laws passed against it. Countercultural Prozac is that people are smoking it in a way that is more addictive, and it's to manage certain feelings. Like, I was using it as anger management in high school, right? Because I wasn't going to trust pills, and smoking weed and dropping acid was revolutionary, right? So how I being seeing, oh, it's a sacred herb, oh, it's herb, it's a harmless natural plant, it's and you're chain smoking. And how many days do you go without using it? So it becomes more like it's a self-medicated prescription. This is one of the main criticisms of medical marijuana, particularly where medical marijuana is smoked. Smoking any drug is an inefficient delivery system. It seems like you just want to justify smoking more weed. Like, because if it was really medicine, what dosage, what potency, for what condition? You can't define that. The solution can't be smoke more bud. Okay? That can't come from Indian country, because they wouldn't say, okay, just smoke all the little smoke you want to have a good feeling with everybody. No. You should learn how to have a good feeling with everybody without anything. You were already designed to do that. So that's what I mean by countercultural Prozac. So within the rules of this worldview, okay, they acknowledge that marijuana is a powerful substance that can expand your vision. However, if you smoke it too much, it clouds your vision. In the same framework. So they're not throwing away the vision. Okay, if you seek vision, that's cool, but you don't need to seek vision every day. You should actually work to actualize the vision you saw the first time you used it. Because the more you use it, it clouds your vision. So if you only used it 4 times a year, for example, the solstices and equinoxes, or once a year on your birthday to seek a vision for the rest of the year, or some other thing like that. Medicine in this framework is not only just the substance, it's also the energy around the substance, too. And life energy outside of the substance that gives the substance its power and gives you your power, too. And medicine is non-addictive, too. All right, addiction is weapon. This is the addiction is slavery meme. It's African American. So addiction to legal and illegal drugs is profitable, i.e. addiction is slavery. So addiction as a weapon. So the solution, if that's the problem, active, spiritually based resistance. So you actually have to be grounded in a healthy life way, and you have to offer resistance because they're always trying to addict you, and addiction is slavery. You want to be free, you need to see it like that, because slavery was based on history and economics. Somebody's making money from it. And major corporations, as well as the underground economy, are stringing you out intentionally. So you're going to have to free yourself and remain free. So there's going to have to be a constant resistance, just like freeing ourselves from slavery. Okay? So active spiritually based resistance, which means spiritually based, you mean you actually have to be connected to something greater than yourself. And feel it. Who knows it, feels it? Yeah. Quote Marley or Peter Tosh or whoever it was that said that. Who knows it, feels it. So resistance against the ism-based cultures which promote addiction, codependency, and promote this is part of the solution, promote self-cultural, historical, spiritual, and interpersonal knowledge, skills, and abilities, which develop self-sufficiency, so you're independent and interdependent. So you're self-sufficient within your own self, and then with other self-sufficient folks, you build a network of support and caring. Cultural proficiency means I know how to act, not only within my own culture, but within other cultures. And economic and political independence. I'm not dependent on underground economy source of income. Look, slavery is returned to America, and particularly where it's sex slavery, the slavers depend on addicting women and the men that are involved within those industries on drugs. There's a reason they do that. An addicted population is a controlled population. All right, so it's not just a matter of getting people out of the sex industry, but it's also having them non-addicted and out of the sex industry. Because there's an economic incentive and a political incentive for keeping them in bondage. So that's why we see it this way. Okay, so for example, this is a billboard from somewhere in the hood. Addiction as a weapon. So it's the deliberate use of power for profit regardless on the effect of others. So when addiction is a weapon, it is the deliberate use of power, that is the power in the drug, for profit regardless of the effect on others. So for example, chattel slavery, the idea, the meme, if you will, is people are property. Property's value and worth, and it leads to the concept that people have economic value and worth, and some people have more value and worth than others. Okay, the people of higher value control the people of lower value and can do whatever they want as long as it creates wealth for the people of higher value. Hence, drug them, sex them. So it's not just simply the individual, you also have to look at the system in terms of recovery. Right? So that's our framework. Okay, and I actually told you about this already. So even if you didn't own slaves, you benefited from slavery existing, because generally if a slave escaped, you didn't help to get them free or help them escape. Generally, unless we're paid to deal with addicts and alcoholics, we don't deal with them unless they're part of our personal life. Right? You may give $1 or something like that to somebody fly and sign, but that's not going to help them out of their situation. Right? There's a structure keeping them in that place. So, addiction-promoting practices came out of slavery. Slaves were given cocaine as an incentive to work. Slaves didn't want to drink alcohol because the overseers drank and then beat and raped them. So that I'm not going to grow up like that. So that was a part of a resiliency piece. So that's what I'm saying. Many of these things that have come to be seen as normal in our society came out of that system that normalized pretty nasty stuff. So recognizing that that has a lot of historical roots is the first step in beginning to undo that. So that's why I wanted to go over this rather than just give you answers on the midterm, because you need to be able to see, okay, what are we doing in terms of devising solutions? So more on this later.